Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
All right. Welcome back to Think Big. Guest today is Margaret Fortner. Margaret, please tell us where you are in the world and what you do for a living.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm actually in Nashville, Tennessee. I am the VP of Marketing for Glamnetic, technically based in LA, but as with many companies post-COVID, we are sort of spread all around. So I oversee all things marketing for Glamnetic. We are an omni-channel beauty brand founded initially late 2019. I joined the team back in early 2021. So by being an omni-channel beauty brand, that means we're sitting across D2C, Amazon, and a substantial retail presence as well. So I sit on the marketing side of things, also oversee our Amazon operations and the data parts of the business.
That's awesome. So you've been at the company for a pretty long time. Just curious, to the best of your knowledge, like what was kind of the main catalyst, does it seem like, was the kind of led to like the inception of the brand? I mean, like what was the big issue in this space that the company was looking to solve as it got started?
Yeah, so I would say it was actually a very personal passion project of our co-founder Anne. So Anne McFerrin emigrated from Thailand when she was very young, and she always viewed beauty and lashes in particular as a way to make her feel more confident and comfortable kind of being in the US for the first time as she was, growing up, learning English, making new friends, everything like that. She actually went to UCLA and was pre-med there, and then coming out of college was kind of feeling, she didn't necessarily want to go the traditional kind of medical school path. So she worked as an artist for a bit, but always had that sort of scientific inventor spirit within her. So it's kind of the perfect blend of all of her experience with lashes and understanding the sort of confidence that it gave to her, combined with wanting to invent a solution for a product that's not the easiest thing in the world to apply, kind of traditional glue-on lashes. I doubt that you've tried it before, but you might have heard from others, sticky and all over your hands and everything. So she wanted to find a solution for lash application that made it easier to apply, quicker, and just made it more accessible for other people who might be looking for confidence solutions like she was. So the US's first 6 magnet lash, that was back in 2019, and then ultimately expanded to press-on nails in late 2020, just kind of continuing to focus on that problem of salon solutions that take a lot of time, take a lot of money, especially during everything that's happening with COVID. You can't necessarily go into the nail salon, so felt that there was kind of that analogous moment between finding an easier way to do lashes and an easier way to do nails. So those are our two main categories right now, but definitely a very personal passion project for Am.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I know you started with the brand in 2021, right? So talk to me a little bit about kind of the changes that you saw. Obviously, everybody kind of had to make some kind of change, and any across industries and every kind of business, right? What were kind of the main drivers of like big pivots for you guys coming out of COVID, even in 2021? I mean, that's still kind of, at least in LA, I'm sure, like myself being in New York, I know 2021 was still very much like, there's still a lot of things going on in some of the really like highly populated areas of the country. So what were some of the big like pivots that you felt like were necessary at that time to continue, with growing the brand and continue success there?
Yeah. So I think the other super fun thing that happened to a lot of brands in 2021 was the release of iOS 14 and the impact that had on the success of digital advertising. Got to tell you, it's super fun to join a business and then 2 months later have a major change that impacts one of your primary areas of focus. Can mess with your head a little bit, but I think we had a couple pivots. LA, and having a very coastal audience, we definitely still saw the impact of COVID restrictions through a lot of 2021 and early 2022. So it was great to have D2C kind of be the core area of our business, but at the same time, we were able to start expanding our retail presence a bit more. I believe we were first in Ulta in either late 2020 or early 2021, and just started gradually expanding that store count throughout 2021 and beyond. We entered in Sephora pretty soon after that and have also expanded across a number of specialty stores. So we were able to start kind of growing that slice of the business as restrictions were lifted. And since there's a heavy concentration of, Ulta and Sephora and retail stores, often in, all over the country, but there were some areas where restrictions were getting lifted more quickly. And because of the the reach that you get with these sorts of partners, we were able to take advantage of that. At the same time, we shifted some focus to growing our Amazon business, which had been comparatively small at that point in time. So I think it was a big focus to going from being a D2C business that had a nice little side project in retail and Amazon to being a true omni-channel business. And I think the different channels kind of saw different growth paths, phases, rates, whatever you want to call it, just based on the natural details as rollouts change and limitations change across the country.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. So it sounds like you kind of got the start in D2C, like a lot of online brands, obviously. Where do you find that like the company kind of sits now as far as like the breakdown between how much of the revenue comes from you don't have to be specific numbers. I'm just thinking more of like slices of the big picture, right? Like how much, like as you sit today, like how much is coming from Amazon versus like your D2C still, and how big of the picture is your retail business now?
I would say retail and D2C are pretty close to each other right now, and thankfully that's due to incremental growth on both. It's not like D2C really drop off and retail
right.
kind of met it there. So they both grew, and Amazon is still the smallest part of the business, but it's having the highest growth rate, and I think could get pretty close to even, again, from an incremental standpoint soon. So I think we've seen the growth rate of D2C also kind of pick back up again, which is great. So I would say we're a very balanced business right now, which is really helpful because we're also a self-funded business. So, we're not sitting on buckets of VC money. So being able to have one channel slows down a little bit, or understanding the different kind of profit structures of these different channels, it's good to have that flexibility.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think to that point, having diversity in those different channels is really important for sustainability, I think. And my next question was going to be, what kind of drove you to decide to expand from? Because so many brands like similar to yours in this industry, they'll do direct to consumer and then like some retail when it comes along, and those are kind of like the two main channels that you see like most brands in this space do. With your direct to consumer success, which obviously has the best margins, what kind of, other than like obviously like, because I agree, like having that diversity is great for many reasons, but I guess with that and anything further than that, like what kind of made you ultimately decide to push into other channels like Amazon and other things as well?
Yeah, on the Amazon side of things, there's a lot of what we focus on now, and I think the focus there was total addressable market and the available audience that's there. It also is an opportunity question. There weren't magnetic lash brands kind of in the more premium magnetic lash space really on Amazon at the time that we started investing there. So kind of lots of search volume around lashes and lash extensions in general, and no one was really taking at that space. And we found the same thing when we pushed more into press-on nails. That's a bit more of a crowded category because press-on nails have been in drugstores and some beauty retailers for a long time. But again, looking more at, let's say, the prestige or masstige space for beauty, that was another area where we had an opportunity. There's also a lot of trickle down and relationship between D2C and Amazon. A lot of times people will think of those as kind of an antagonistic relationship because, people are going to go to Amazon for the shipping and there's lower prices and you're forced to price match when you lose the buy box or anything. But there is such a strong relationship between investment on direct to consumer, like upper funnel channels, and also just your general branding efforts and how that trickles down to Amazon, both in being able to even kind of grow and establish your own market, but also to establish yourself as the primary player within that space. So there's a natural relationship that exists there and has been super successful and scalable. On the retail side, I think, we had an amazing opportunity, partially due to investment in D2C ads, to get into a premier beauty player like Ulta. And when you think about products like ours, especially at a more premium price point, you want people to be able to see the product and feel the difference because there's only so much you can do. There have been some great expansions in terms of rich media that you can do on websites, but there's something different about, looking at the product and feeling it and comparing it to what you've done in the past. So I think that physical touch point is really valuable for a lot of beauty brands, especially in more of the prestige space.
And that's really interesting. And one of the other things I find really interesting with companies that do direct to consumer first and then get into retail is they find, even though it's not always easy to like hash out this data, but do you have anything to support that people will buy in retail stores, get familiar with the brand, love it, feel the difference, and then turn around and come back to buying direct to consumer from the website or even through Amazon? Do you find that that's like an organic funnel that's kind of been created since you've done retail, or do you find they're kind of exclusive of each other?
Yeah, I can say with a very high degree of confidence that there's the retail to direct consumer pipeline. I think logically, I can say that there's a lot of, maybe even more retail to Amazon just due to the convenience factor there. The reason I can say it with full confidence on the D2C side is we have done a ton of data setup, whether it's from simpler, how did you hear about us sort of post-purchase survey, but we also have some very built out post-purchase surveys that go out in our flows. And we actually completely redid our post-purchase survey last year due to the growth of all three of these channels to ask some more specific questions around buying behavior to try and learn more about people who are purchasing across multiple channels and why they may choose one channel versus another. So that pipeline is there, and I'd be super shocked if it's not there just as much for retail to Amazon.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. And it's funny that you mentioned this kind of like antagonistic relationship between D2C and Amazon. A lot of people mentioned to me that like Amazon's great. The convenience is there, like building the brand, just getting the word out is valuable in its own right. But, some of the problems with Amazon are the same as, problems with retail. If you're trying to push D2C more than anything else is, you just kind of miss the data and the surveying opportunities. In your case, it sounds like you have a pretty good system set up where you're able to find that feedback when people buy online. You find that, many of them do come from retail. Kind of the same story with Amazon and retail is, as a growing company, if you're not getting enough, you look for like the feedback almost even more than you do for the sales, right? At the really early stages. So, but I think it's really important for people to hear because, we have a lot of like entrepreneur listeners, obviously. So, kind of having the perspective of what that relationship looks like between your channels as you've grown to something as big as your brand is versus, maybe what somebody's experience is like, maybe at the more early growth stages where like there can be some friction there. But in your case, I think it works a lot better because the reach is a little bit further. So they kind of like complement each other when you're at, I think, like the stage of public awareness about the product that you have.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to understand that not all products, and that can either be a macro, like what is the primary product category that you're selling standpoint, or even subcategories that you're selling. For us, it would be lashes versus nails, or even specific styles may work or not work, or work differently on different channels. I know that there are certain nail styles that are going to work well on direct to consumer, but may not work well in retail or vice versa. Or we saw certain shifts in kind of our product catalog that happened first on Amazon before they happened on any of our other channels. So I think that's something to always keep in mind. Just because something works in one channel doesn't mean it will work in the others, and vice versa. If it doesn't work in one channel, that doesn't mean it's not worth trying in some of the others. I think Amazon is a really great testing ground because there's so many eyeballs there naturally. You don't have to pay to get the eyeballs there. They're already there, and you don't have to deal with the challenge of retail of having to get a retailer to commit or having to take off a hero product in order to put this test product in. So I would encourage people to kind of think through the more complex strategies cross-channel.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And it's necessary if you are going to, open yourself up to be kind of on omni-channel like you are. Now, I'm curious, this is probably a little bit more targeted and clear, I bet, in the early stages. But I mean, do you still kind of see that there's even maybe a little bit more generally than like a complete avatar? But like who do you find is your general kind of like age range, demographic, psychographic kind of target customer base? Is that something that's still kind of consistent as you become so wide ranging and omni-channel, or has it kind of become more broad? And I guess if it is more broad, like where did you kind of start with that avatar? I guess more in the earlier stages. I'd be curious.
Yeah, I think less about kind of demographic avatars, more about psychographic avatars, and that would be use case is one of the primary things that I would think about. And really, when you want to grow your business beyond a certain stage, I always think of it kind of like a target, for lack of a better term. So, you start with a specific audience that you're going to understand super well, and your product's going to be a perfect fit for them. Okay, you're going to capture all of them. But then you have to figure out, all right, that next group who's similar to my audience, but may not, let's say, have the full awareness of what this product is. How do you reach out to them? And in order to grow the business, you have to keep expanding and reaching different rings of that target, but understanding that the needs and messaging for different rings of the target are going to be different from the others. So understanding that, and also creating products that can be framed in different ways in different use cases is super important. So I think when we first started out, it was a lot of people who had familiarity specifically with lashes. They had tried the traditional glue lashes. They had gotten their lashes done in a salon, and they knew that it was inconvenient or expensive. So they were the real beauty gurus, the girls who are obsessed, who want to be on top of everything. Very, kind of coastal areas, I would say. But as we've grown the business, both in terms of our products or product categories, everything like that, there are only so many of those women out there. So, or men, anyone who's interested in super deep beauty products. So there are going to be more people who want to use a product to wear to work or meet up with friends or go on a coffee date than people who want to find the latest and greatest specific eyelash beauty innovations. So I think that's been, even if one product that we have could appeal to that initial customer, a lot of it's thinking through how can we frame it to reach that incremental customer who isn't already going to immediately look at our product and be like, oh yeah, I understand that. That's obviously better than what I'm doing. I'm going to purchase it, because that customer is super easy to get. I'm more interested in the person who is not super aware of beauty, hasn't ever worn press-on nails. Maybe they will go to a salon before they're going to a wedding or something like that. That's where the opportunity is.
Those like the more incremental audience, like you're even trying to reach people who are not even at like the problem aware stage, right? Where they're like, exactly. They don't even know that like better things exist out there. Your reach is even going as general and as far as like to that stage of like a consumer base now.
Yeah. If you think about the nail category as an example, nail polish is probably well known by most people who might possibly be interested in our product. So it's thinking through where can you create that connection, and analog to that will also explaining why it's better without getting necessarily too technical and complex. So a lot of it's, we're kind of obsessed with the problem solution statement side of things and testing those constantly, I would say.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And to this point, it sounds like your direct to consumer is still, the direct to consumer and your retail are kind of at parity with each other. So obviously, direct to consumer is still a very large part of the business. What kind of channels are you operating just as far as like advertising goes, like straight like paid ads on different platforms? I mean, like what is your general like strategy there these days as you've kind of grown to be seeking a more like a little bit more general audience or incremental audience rather than a specific avatar, maybe like it used to be? What does that kind of strategy look like for you guys?
So, we're on the core social channels, Facebook, TikTok. We have a very built out Google search presence as far as you need to. But I think as we've grown to reach that broader audience, we also understand that there may be more steps necessary for someone before they convert. So for us, it's been a big focus on maximizing the number of people from whom we're getting some sort of information once they make it to site. So I think a lot of people think of email and SMS, and we'll call them, retention channels. So you're mostly thinking post-purchase, but I think they are super crucial acquisition channels, especially as you're scaling more, you're spending more money. You just have to kind of increase that take rate from a email capture standpoint and make sure you're tuning those flows constantly. So I think of those as just as core channels, even if you wouldn't traditionally call them paid channels. But I mean, Facebook, so many people are frustrated with Facebook that kind of stuck with it. It's inconsistent. They'll have random outages, but it still has the broadest reach. Even younger generations, they'll say, oh, I never go on Facebook. Well, you're on Instagram all the time. So, get used to it. I think my frustration is more with TikTok than with Facebook, to be completely honest. I feel like they change their algorithm every 5 minutes. They're pushing lives nonstop one day, and then they're pushing shop nonstop the next. And not only as a user is that an inconvenient experience, it's an inconvenient experience as an advertiser. So I don't know if this is a hot take in 2024, but I actually think Facebook has it together a lot more than TikTok does. So nothing crazy from the advertising channel standpoint. In the past, we've run TV ads, we've leaned more into podcasts, we've done Pinterest, we've done some of the Tabulas and Criteos of the world. We have a couple of experimental channels kind of in the pipeline that I don't want to give away our secrets off there that I'm excited about, and some good opportunities there. But honestly, core is kind of the Facebook, TikTok, Google, YouTube, dichotomy of things.
Yeah, I think as far as general sentiment goes, something you mentioned I think is really interesting is utilizing the like really direct channels like SMS and email marketing on not necessarily the top end that far, but like just most people do think about that as pre-purchase. And usually when folks talk about it, when they come on the pod or, when I do an interview with somebody, like that's almost exclusively when they're, executing those types of campaigns through email and SMS is almost always post-purchase. I think it is really important for people to understand. It's a very cheap and very useful tool, to drive new business as well. It doesn't necessarily always have to be retention and recurring business tools with those two things. So I think that's really good advice. I think it's really important that people hear that. And I think on the other side of things, it is kind of a hot take, I would say. In 2024 with, that Facebook is still I don't know if it's necessarily your most successful channel, but maybe just like what seems to be working best for you. I've not heard a lot of that. So I'm curious, like, what are you kind of running as far as like, Facebook ads go? I mean, do you feel like you're doing anything different than a lot of other brands, or do you think it's just maybe circumstantial?
It's really hard to say. I've listened to podcasts and, everyone's freaking out out about where their CPMs are. Our CPMs are at 400%. My CPMs are down year over year. Our click-through rates are up. I think that it's always important in this area to understand that if you want to take credit for all of your successes, you have to take credit for all of your losses as well. So I'm not someone who's going to sit here and be like, because Facebook's working for me right now, it means we're a genius and we're doing everything amazing and we're much better. I think every category at a certain point is going to see tailwinds. So I think we're getting some benefit there, but I do think we have a really strong creative team. That's been a major area of focus. Having a really strong in-house team, having a really strong content flow, and then even more importantly, having a really strong data infrastructure to support that, because you can put out the greatest ads in the world, but if you don't know if they work and you don't know why they worked, you're never going to see improvement. So I think that's been a really big area of focus since I joined the team. So I do think that there's some element worrying on high here, there, and seeing a lot of success in that regard. But I'm also not going to pretend that press on nails aren't popular right now and that we aren't really well known as a player within the lash space and everything like that. So where I can point to creative pretty confidently as a contributor there is the fact that our CPMs aren't up and that our click-through rate is up. Because if you think about where you can not fully isolate to creative impact, but where there's a lot of creative impact will be on the Facebook's read on quality of that, and then consumer reaction, which would be the click-through rate side. I think the final piece would be we have done a ton of work on website optimization in pretty much every area, navigability, speed, just kind of constant updates and testing. So again, conversion rate is another thing that Facebook takes into account for its CPM formula. So I think you can't hyper-focus fully if you want to see success. If you have a relatively small team and you want to hyper-focus on something, it should be creative and making sure that you understand how your creative is working and why. But I think to really continue to scale and to see results, you have to kind of be keyed in on all of those core areas. I mean, I started my career in ad buying, and I still have one of our platforms that I own and run just in part to stay close to how everything's working. But I will sit here and say, like, the actual campaign structure and like campaign strategy, like that's not what matters. It doesn't matter. It's 5% of the results. Like, unless you're doing something actively wrong, your campaign structure and strategy is probably not going to have an impact. It's all about the creative. It's all about the website experience, it's about the offer, and it's about product quality, I think is kind of the last big piece.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think something people miss out on, I think younger companies, they run these paid ads and all they're looking at is like, how much traffic, how many sales did I get directly from my landing page that came from like this ad or the other. I think that, like, what you say about this kind of indirect, return on investing in things like paid ads is, all the data that you get from it and all the feedback that you can get to enhance what your ultimate point is that the product development and to help the creative side of things with the brand is more important than your actual, that 5% you say of, what your like actual strategy is. But you can use those kinds of things to, get the data that you need to capitalize on exactly what you're saying, which I agree is definitely the most important. So I think that's a good point. People should definitely, take into account when they're thinking about a long-term and big idea kind of marketing strategy. And then, so I guess something a little interesting that you mentioned, I want to ask just one question about is, you say you've done a lot of website optimization. You say you've kind of gotten like doing some testing on that front. What does that kind of look like? Like, how do you get direct feedback, from people about like the general, like, makeup of the website, how easy it is to navigate? Like, how do you really pinpoint where the friction is as far as like website design goes?
That's a great question. Sunsetting Optimize was really annoying. I was not happy about that. Obviously, that was such an easy A/B testing. So I would advise everyone to have some form of site tracking tool, whether it's a Hotjar or Clarity. Clarity's free and it works great. And make sure you're checking in on that. Depending on your site volume, it could be daily, it could be every 3 days, it could be weekly, because that does a great job of showing you heat maps and also even shows you things like dead clicks, frustration clicks, all those sorts of areas. And you can break down looking at, check all of your highest volume pages, check your homepage, see where people are clicking. We introduced a module on one of our main pages about a year and a half ago and suddenly discovered that it was taking up the majority of clicks versus what we thought was the primary element and had been on that page at that point. So then we were like, okay, our focus has to be on making sure that we are constantly updating this element and that our focus is on this element. Whenever we're releasing a new feature, we have to make sure it doesn't impact how that element appears and how that element works. I don't have a huge development team, so I can't pretend we have this whole operation. And there is some element of fast and break things almost, but with the added caveat of check those things to make sure they're not horribly broken and see if they're actually working, and always have a way to revert just in case. We introduced filter buttons on our collection pages. And that was just something that it was kind of a gut feeling of, hey, I know we have a ton of SKUs on site. Focusing on navigability is really important. I think that this will be a way to do it versus making people interact with our filter. You can't have an ego about your ideas. That was one that happened to work out, but I've had other ideas like introducing a ombre background on collections pages that we all at a certain point just said, yeah, this doesn't work. And that was one of those things. And I think this is important in every area of marketing, merging both the quantitative strategy and analytics and logic side of things and the creative strategy and analytics and logic side of things. There weren't technically any numbers with that ombre background that were telling me that it was bad, but polling other people on the team from a ton of different areas of focus and conducting some user research within, we have a big private Facebook group of our top customers who we use a lot for both product testing and website research. It showed that it was the right move to revert that. Don't have an ego about your ideas. Similarly to what I said about ads, just make sure you're always checking back on how they did. Like, don't launch a test or new feature and just kind of leave it there. And to your question about just making sure that you are leveraging your customers where you can, whether it's through private Facebook group. We've done guided Zoom calls before with customers, reached out to them via email and gone through and shown them potential Figma designs before we go live with them. We'll have a lot of team discussions. We're a very cross-functional team working closely together, which I think is extremely valuable because the way that the web team thinks about something is going to be different from the way that the social team thinks about something is going to be different than the PD team. So pulling in those ideas, it can give a really valuable, fresh perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the kind of big picture of like almost everything that we talked about today was really data driven. I think that's really important for like any brands, new brands, or even maybe brands that are, experiencing maybe some deceleration is like, you need to have that feedback. You need to be able to be like mining this data at every turn, to find out where things are going wrong. Because if you don't, you'll never be able to identify which things are going really well to double down on it. And you won't be able to identify the parts of the puzzle that are maybe causing, too much friction. And you might just say you end up guessing, I think. And I think a lot of, younger companies, 95% of businesses fail. I think this is a great piece of advice for people is like, you might get tired of looking at the data, especially like, a CEO is kind of doing it all themselves, but it's got to be one of the most important things. It's one of the biggest like recurring, I think, like topics of conversation and like, brands I'm finding that are experiencing like high growth and acceleration. It's always a common theme of, what are you doing differently? Do you think? Well, it's always like, well, we use this data in this really creative way and, get feedback in these ways, like you're doing those guided calls. Like that's very unique. And there's a million ways you can, get feedback from people, whether it's personally one-on-one with customers, doing surveys in a more like massive area, looking at the data from your ads, looking at the data from like a site tracker like you have. Those are all really, I think, important pieces of the puzzle to get like a really good and truthful, honest, non-egotistical picture of what people actually have as far as preferences go when it comes to your brand. So I think it's really important. I really appreciate the insights there. Last couple of questions, something I like to ask everybody that comes on the pod. You being VP of sales, I think is a perfect, person to answer this question too, with, everything that's changed since you started. If you could go back to kind of your like first day here, knowing everything you know now, everything you've learned over the years about the brand specifically, working with your colleagues and all those kinds of things. I mean, if you give yourself just one piece of advice, whether it's personal, business, whatever it is, since you started your journey with this brand, what do you think that one piece of advice would be?
Take iOS 14 more seriously.
Nah, fair enough.
Sounds very specific.
It's a good answer.
One of my biggest regrets is I was so overconfident. I remember telling our co-founder, Kevin, it's going to be fine. It's not a big deal. I remember when they got rid of the purchase data in Facebook after the Cambridge Analytica thing, and everyone thought it was the end of the world. Just didn't understand the scope of what that impact was going to be. So I think we could have been better prepared.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think everybody in the universe, fortunately, was in like the exact same boat. Believe me, if you listen to any of like last like probably 25 podcasts we've done, it's a topic of conversation, and nobody was prepared because I think they did. I think a lot of folks like they'd equate it to past changes that like everything kind of levels out after time. This was something that, for whatever reason, just it changed, and it changed for good, and everybody had to pivot with that. So I think that's a very fair and honest answer. I appreciate that. So yeah, I also just want to give you an opportunity to let people know maybe they're hearing about the brand for the first time, or just like you personally listening to the pod. Let people know what the best way to keep in touch with the brand is, keep in touch with updates. Do you have if you have a newsletter, what the socials are, everything like that.
So we are online at glamnetic.com. We are available in Ulta's and Sephora's across the U.S. and in Canada on the Sephora side. We're available on Amazon. Majority of our product catalog is there. We do some pretty fun emails. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on X now. I was going to say Twitter, but so we follow there. We have some teams putting a lot of effort that is driven by data into those results. We also do some in-person events, largely in LA. So information on that is often in socials. We have a Facebook group called the Glam Fam. If you're a huge fan, you want to get early access to learning about releases, opportunities to talk directly with our founder and our product development team, maybe some product testing opportunities. And then our co-founders, Kevin Gould and Ann McFerrin, are great follows on, Instagram and TikTok as well. They're always doing a lot of stuff, whether speaking at conferences or just going to cool places. I would shout them out there as well.
Amazing. Margaret, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Your insights are invaluable. Yeah, just want to say thanks, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks, everybody.